So we want to welcome you to a conversation. My name is Brian Wallace. I serve on the staff at Pittsburgh Presbytery.
And I am Ralph Lowe. I serve on staff as well, Director of Justice Ministries.
And we've been working together for about a year
Yep.
at this point. And we've become pretty tight over the last year.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things that we thought would be helpful in light of everything that happened in the last week is to have a conversation and really let you listen in. Mm-hmm. We've had similar conversations, but I actually don't know where this one is going to go. But because so much of what we need in this country right now is to improve our levels of understanding of understanding the people that we don't agree with. Mm-hmm. When you have reduced your view of others to what they post on Facebook, you're getting a very bad single-dimensional view of people.
Yes.
So I want to tell just real briefly a little bit about some of what I've learned over the 39 years that I've been alive. I grew up as an only child in an all-white family. Grew up in the straight-up suburbs. My high school had maybe 10% non-white, maybe 10. That might even be a little generous. But honestly, like growing up, I would describe my parents as being people who did not teach me to be racist. One of my dad's closest friends, actually, the guy who got him a job was an African-American man. And so we interacted with him regularly. There was never in my mind this idea that persons of color were of any less dignity, value, or worth, right? And I'm young enough that like Martin Luther King was a hero in my history books and so all that kind of stuff. But I still grew up super white.
Yes, sir.
Super white. And then I chose like the whitest college in the world to go to in Grove City College, where people were like, well, what's the diversity like in Grove City? And I was like, well, we got Methodists, Presbyterians, Catholics, fundamentalists, and Pentecostals. Don't forget the Pentecostals.
That's right.
Which was kind of joking, but was also true, right? That like it was not a very diverse part of town. And then I came to seminary, where I interacted with more people who were African American. Mm-hmm. But even in that setting, we were all still master's level students studying together. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely gained some insight into some of the differences in what it's like to grow up as an African American versus a white person. But then I took a call at a wonderful all-white suburban congregation that I dearly loved and dearly love to this day. But nothing really changed for me. And what I want to say by changed is like it's not like I went around thinking black people are bad, right? What I would say is I just didn't get it. I didn't understand that some of the things that I had grown up with and what I thought was normal about life just wasn't for persons of color. I didn't really learn until I started running a rental business where I was renting camera equipment on the side. Yeah. And I had like this nonstop flow of young African-American men coming to me to rent equipment. Mm-hmm. And I was so confused. Mm-hmm. But why would you drive out to the suburbs? It just seems to go against everything that I knew. Sure. And I had one customer who was a really great guy. But let's just be honest, fit a certain stereotype of a black man.
Yeah, you and I have talked about, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Fit a certain stereotype.
Yeah.
Awesome customer, great guy. And I remember asking him one day, like, man, why do I have all these young African American men coming to me? And one, he looked at me like I was the idiot, right? He gave me this look like, really?
Yeah.
And he basically said, look, man, like we don't have credit. It's like we don't have credit. When to rent from an online store, you need a credit card. But to get a credit card, you've got to have credit. Right. It's like, we don't have credit. We can't. It's like, you'll take cash, and you just ask me for my gas bill. And like nothing changed in like my core beliefs in that moment. But I suddenly was like, whoa. I had never thought of that.
That's right.
Had never thought of that.
That's right.
Right? It never crossed my mind. Yeah. Like my mom got me a credit card when I was 16 because she wanted me to start building credit. Right. And he's like we don't have that. So that's just one incident where it wasn't like all of a sudden I was like, man, Doran's really human. Yeah. Like I loved him as much after that story as before. but it totally helped me understand.
Sure.
It totally is like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, it opened my reality. So I guess my first question for you is, you grew up here. What was it like?
So I'm going to start by just specifically talking to your experience that you had when you were renting to young black men who obviously were working and using that equipment for something for work-related purposes, and unfortunately did not have the credit at the time to go to one of the stores who would take credit, right, and rent equipment. And there are some, and you and I will talk about this at a later time, there's some systems in place that we and I have talked about that we believe allows for that to happen, where young black men and women do not have that credit, where where white men and women do. But specifically to your question about how I grew up here, what it was like for me growing up in Pittsburgh, it was typical for a young black man in the city, in most cities, and I can't exclude Pittsburgh because it was just as difficult here. I know we like to believe that we are the city that loves everyone. We all bleed black and gold, which that may be true, but we have our issues here too when it comes to race, as many other cities. How do I know this, Brian?
Yeah.
Because I lived it.
Yeah.
I experienced it. What I want people to understand is, living while black, when you hear that, I think sometimes, and this is me projecting, you think that is just something that we wear as a badge of honor, maybe. That living while black is something you say because you're black and you love being black, which I do, which is the case. But living while black actually means that there's a set of rules, stipulations, oppressions that apply to me each and every day that do not apply to people who are not of color. Okay? We've all heard the stories of being followed by black people being followed around stores when they go into a department store, or people asking for some form of ID when you walk into a dealership to buy a car without even asking do they want to see a car, and things of that nature. And all that is very true, and we can have a conversation about that at some other time. But what's important to note here, and I think it was very prevalent in your story, is this sense of worth. You talked about this identity you had with people of color as there was never a sense of worth in your world. There was never a sense of, I am worth this, and they are worth this by whatever degree in your life. And your actions spoke to that, I think. And just by the conversation you and I have had, your actions spoke to that. They weren't, in your opinion, demeaning of people of color. I think where we get in trouble, and when we miss it as Christians, white Christians, is that whenever we have those situations when we can act on the injustices and oppressions in this world and we don't, we're kind of biting into, not even kind of, we are allowing that system to be in place. Now, let me give you an example. There have been so many videos of African American men and women being killed at the hands of police officers, at the hands of other people, other white people. And yet it took for this incredulous, this horrible knee on a black man's neck for all of us to feel this urge to do something all at one time. We've been feeling that the whole time. The whole time, Brian. That's what I mean when I talk about worth. If you could imagine yourself as a person of color, and I say that with a cringe, and it took for this event to happen for you now to care, that speaks to me of my worth as a man of color. in your eyes? Fair or unfair? That speaks to that. So, and I think, Brian, what we want to do together here is just not only talk about how we as people are worthy of action, worthy and need the action of white people, but also kind of to educate so you understand where, why, and how this feeling of worthiness and oppression is so heavy on us. And hopefully filter through those things that you may say or feel that get in the way of action for you. You and I don't take this conversation lightly, I think.
No. Mm-mm.
And I think we will get some things really right and some things really wrong in this conversation.
Sure.
But I want to be clear, the most important thing is that these conversations are happening between the two of us.
Yeah. I think one of the things that white people never want to be labeled as is you never want to be labeled as racist, right? Like you just don't.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways that I've seen that play out, and like not even other white people.
That's right.
Like just myself.
Just yourself. Yes.
Like, oh shoot, does that sound racist?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Or oh shoot, is this racist?
Yes.
So part of what makes your story unique is that your wife is not a person of color.
That's right.
So in some ways you've therefore had to kind of live in this dual world.
I have, yeah.
What's that been like for you?
So it's funny because
we should say your wife's amazing.
My wife,
right?
Thank you. My wife is amazing.
Like, let's get that out there.
Let's get that out there.
Because you know Kelly's going to listen. We're both going to hear it.
That's right. So Kelly's amazing.
Okay, Kelly's amazing.
She's wonderful.
Yeah.
She's wonderful. She's a school teacher in the city, and she's the best school teacher there is in the city. So the question that you asked me is, how is that with that role between a husband of a person that is white, a woman that is white, and living in this city as a black man. And it's funny you bring that up because my wife and I talk about this, and our experiences as a couple in this city alone have been just unbelievable at some points. When we tell stories about experience, with Brian I talked about in our introduction, if you watched it, our experiences allow for my wife to articulate to her other white friends those experiences because she's married to a man of color, and then she has children of color. So again, it's about those experiences. But specifically to your question, it is nice for people to think, and I'm just projecting here, that the city of Pittsburgh is one of those cities that's a melting pot that everyone gets along. But I'm here to tell you, as a black man married to a white woman, that is not the case a lot of the time. Now, I've lived in Pittsburgh for 40 plus years, so I've evolved in a lot of things. As I see it, and as I understand it from a ground level view of a black man, some white people just can't help themselves because they don't know, Brian. They don't know,
Okay.
So my wife and I, when put in positions of racist conversation or racism, inappropriate conversations, inappropriate jokes, and all those things that can happen in mixed company, which you were talking about. It is so important for us to talk about it and bring it to light. My wife is so good at saying and excusing, because she can, listen, I know this isn't what you meant, but this is what you said. So while you might not have meant that,
yes,
this is what you said, and these are the things that it means to people of color. Right? If I could give an example, Brian, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I have 4 boys. I think a lot of people know that. And they're 4 beautiful, wonderful boys, and the world it's much better because they're in it. They're going to do much better than I in making it the creation that God wants us to be. But in introducing ourselves to someone who doesn't know us, person who is white, I'll say, or my wife will say, we have 4 boys. And sometimes this person will say, oh, do they have the same mother? Just think about that, Brian.
Yeah.
Do they have the same mother?
It's not funny.
So I laugh when I hear it.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So your initial reaction is okay, buddy. I laugh. Now, if you're listening to this, you might have even thought that thought at some point when you first met me, because I have 4 boys. I have 4 boys is considered a good number of kids. That example right there is just the example of the mentality that some people have when it comes to people of color.
So when you hear that question,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, do they have the same mother?
Yeah.
What do you hear?
What I hear in that question is you couldn't possibly, as a person of color, procreated with just one person and had 4 kids.
So you immediately feel thrust upon you the stereotype of the promiscuous, like afraid of commitment, absentee father,
Correct.
right? Type of
Correct.
Stereotype is thrust on you.
And thank you for saying that out loud, and I didn't have to
It's
say
like
it out loud.
almost,
Thank you.
it's
Yes.
like almost an assumption, right? Like
Almost an assumption.
Like you're a black man,
You're
you
a
got
black
4
man.
kids, and no way they're all from the same mom.
Yes. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And again, Brian, that's just a small piece, but it's important to be understood.
Yeah.
That is the mentality that some people have. And that seeps into everything else.
So let me give an example that'll get to a different question.
Okay.
A friend of mine who tragically recently just passed away had a massive spread between her 4 kids. I think off the top of my head, it was something on the order of like 16 years between a 10-year-old and a 26-year-old, right? But it was in that range. And she would often get the question, do they have the same father? Right? Now, she was a white woman. And so some people might say to you, Ralph, I mean, come on, that's not a race. Like, what for you is the distinction there?
So the distinction for me, I will say, is the number of times that it happens.
Yeah.
The distinction for me is all the other experiences I've had.
Yeah.
So let's be honest. Not all of those people those men and women who have said those words were intentionally or subconsciously have these thoughts of promiscuity for me, of course. But a lot have.
Yeah.
Okay? And if we don't talk about it and address it that way, we'll never get at the real important meat of racism and why it exists in this country, in this city.
Yeah. Because as a contrast, nobody would ever say, because I have a couple of friends who have 4+ kids.
Yeah.
Like, I have never heard anyone ever say, do they have the same father?
That's right.
Except where there was a huge age range.
That's right.
Like
right.
everybody else who I can think of, and I have a number of people who have families of 4 or more, I never remember them saying, like, are they from the same father?
That's right.
So that brings up for me like something else.
Yeah.
I remember right after we started working, I was telling you a story about where I met a person of color as a client of mine in the parking lot of Comfort Inn off Route 28 at like 9:30 at night.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so I roll in, and he rolls in, and let's be honest, the music's going, it's loud, right? Pulls in, I pop my trunk, he pops his trunk, I unload big heavy cases and bags of stuff into his trunk.
Yeah.
And I kind of noticed that the police officer is sitting there. And the next question was, did he come over? Did he run his lights at you? I remember being like, no.
Yeah.
Like, no, he didn't. No.
Yeah.
Right? And like the one other time was actually in the Home Depot parking lot in East Liberty, a similar scene.
Yeah.
This time a white client, right? Where I like saw the police the police officer look over, immediately saw it was two white guys, and it was not. But you said that.
Yeah.
Did he come up?
I did.
No.
I did.
Like, why would he?
Yeah.
That didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that spoke to like a real fundamental difference. And like looking back on it, the guy was so nervous.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he was.
Was so nervous
I'm sure he was.
about
I'm sorry.
this, and I was just like, who cares?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the client you guys was of color, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So specifically to that, you and I have talked about my experiences with police officers and growing up living while black, and I can't tell you how many times I have been stopped on a casual walk in my own neighborhood with my friends for no other reason that I was walking while black.
Yeah.
We've all heard that term.
Yeah.
It's an experience for me. Now, in the latter part of my childhood, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. But some of you might not know that. And early on, we were in a predominantly black neighborhood. So it was easy to identify the black person in the neighborhood when we were walking, and it was so blatant at times that my friends who were white would say to me, "Hey, we're going to such and such, so be prepared. This is what we're planning to do for the day, so be prepared." Whether we pulled over by the police if I was driving or somebody else was driving, or stopped on the road if we were walking. That was my experience. So there's never been an experience where, at least when I was a young adult or a child, where a police officer's presence meant security for me, or meant protect and serve. It was always an eye of scrutiny of what are you doing, why are you here, should you be here? Yeah.
I think in a future conversation, we need to talk about engagement with law enforcement.
We do.
Because there's the immediate pushback
Yeah.
is cops have a tough job.
Yeah.
There are black cops.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And most cops that I know, I'll speak from my own experience, I think are good, faithful people who just want to do the right thing and do their job. All that aside, it doesn't make it not a problem.
That's right.
It doesn't make it not a reality.
That's right.
I've had one encounter with a cop in my life. I got pulled over on my birthday. And looking back on it, I was pretty snippy with the cop.
Yes.
Because I knew he was wrong. He cleared out a stop sign, and I knew I hadn't, right?
Yes.
And speaking to another experience, I just remember a friend of mine hearing that story and being like, man, it's you're lucky you're white.
Was this a friend of color?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I would never,
Yeah.
ever
Yeah.
be sharp back to a cop.
Yeah.
Right? And I still remember the girl I was dating at the time, digging her hand into my knee.
Yeah.
Trying to get me to shut up.
Yeah.
And I just wouldn't let it go because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And, it's pretty bad. It's just,
Yeah.
But then the person said, man, I would never ever do that.
Yeah, so at the next one that we do, I would love to have that deep conversation. But it's important to note that, as I spoke about early on, your worth.
Yeah.
It is the repetition of these instances of living while black that speaks to your feeling of worth in this country, in this city. It's very important to note. So while we have these conversations and we love each other and we're talking, it's important for me to let everyone know that this overwhelming current of worth is very important. And we can talk about where we get our worth from and how we get that worth. But as I talk about my experiences, and Brian and I kind of vet that out, it's important to note that, because if we don't get that part of it, we won't get the rest.
So I want to close on this one, because this was something that you said to me that is so stuck out. Because one of the things that white people sometimes fairly say when racism accusations come up is say, but it's not about race, right? It's not about race. And you and I had a situation not that many months ago.
We did.
Where you came to me and said, Brian, is it because I'm black?
Yeah.
Right? You were in a situation, I was familiar with the system, and you had the honest question, Brian, is this because I'm black? If it were, I think you actually said, if it were Brian Wallace walking in there,
I did.
Would the result have been different?
Yeah.
Right? And you said at the time, in the back of your mind, it's always running, is it because I'm black?
Yes.
I never once have thought, is it because I'm white?
I'm so glad you said
in a
that.
critical sense. I mean, right. Like jokingly, I can say it, right? But like I was telling the story last night to my kids. One of my classmates in high school who was black was telling us that she was going on a college tour, and jokingly said, "But y'all can't come to us."
Yes.
Right? Because it was historically black colleges, right? It was great.
Yes.
And I just remember being like, "Oh, it's because I'm white," right?
Yes.
And jokingly comment.
Yes.
So, but in a serious sense, in a critical, am I being discriminated against sense, I've never thought to myself,
is it because
I'm white? Give me examples of what it's like to have that narrative running through your head all the time.
A narrative is in my head, and I actually put this in my letter, that one of the key things in educating yourself as a white Presbyterian and white sibling in Christ is to note that racism is everywhere and probably in everything. It's just understanding where and how deep it is. For me as a black man, I can't afford not to have that in the back of my mind. I can't afford not to have this mentality of the next situation, this situation I'm in, I am a black man entering into this situation. Because the two things, Brian, first is my life could be taken.
Yeah.
Right? Police or no police. Okay? So, and the second, of course, is, and the most important thing is, I am a father and I'm a husband. So, I said earlier that I've been living over 40 years in the city of Pittsburgh, and I said I evolved. So mentally, my decision making when it comes to entering into any situation where I feel that has changed from when I was a single black man to a father of 4, married, 22 years, black man. It's very important. So the reason why I say that is because it's easy for us to have this opinion about the actions of these black people versus these black people, which is horrible to say out loud, but truth. Why can't you be, okay, I'm digressing, Brian, and I apologize, but specifically to your question, I can't afford not to have that mentality. I can't. It's a life and death for me. And it's also, I have to think about the interests of my family, me being here for my boys and my wife, and the perception, whatever it is, that precedes me when I enter into it.
So people will say, "Oh, you're playing the race card, right? Oh, you're playing the race card." And what I hear you saying is, you don't have a choice.
I don't have a choice. That's right. I don't have a choice.
And even in situations where, in hindsight, you can realize, okay, that's not because I'm black.
But I need to have a lens beforehand that I am.
For self-preservation.
For self-preservation. That's right.
Yeah.
For self-preservation. And let's be honest, Brian, not only for myself, but I travel with my boys, my wife, so it's not even just my own, it's people around me. You and I travel together. I have to think about that. I have to, for my own sake and for your sake. Because you wouldn't think about that because you just admitted you don't. But I have to. And people of color think about it all the time. We can't afford not to.
We can't afford not to.
We can't afford not to.
Yeah. And so here's what I will say. I think the one time that people do think about their own racial identity as white people is when they're in a predominantly black neighborhood. Because there's assumptions that we carry, especially as a kid who grew up in the suburbs, about the city. And I think this is one of the nuances where we talk about like realizing and knowledge versus our own abstract beliefs, right? Like I could unequivocally say, of course I'm not racist. Like I have tons of friends at school, persons of color. I love them. Like I run track with them, right? Like they're great. But yet I have assumptions about the areas that other black people live.
Yes, and you go in a seminary probably had.
So coming from Grove City College, which is in the middle of nowhere, practically speaking, and coming to live in East Liberty, in a little segment of East Liberty, it's important to note that. But also to realize that was 2003 to 2006, not East Liberty today, which is different. But in just some of the assumptions, some of the things that we were told, we were told by a person of color who was the dean of students, that we would probably feel more comfortable shopping at the Giant Eagle in Aspinwall, right? And like, I don't think that was bad advice. I think he was just being honest.
He was just being honest,
right?
absolutely.
As a person of color, he's like, you know. And I remember talking to people at the church I served for Field Ed about, you know, well, do you live on campus? Yeah. Oh, so you live in the city? And I'd be like, yeah, right. I mean, like, I never once. Parking and living where I did, I never was concerned.
Right.
And you know, part of what I learned, I think this was a really critical step for me. Like, there was violence around the seminary.
Yeah.
The first week that I lived there, the first weekend, a kid was shot in the Sunoco parking lot right next to the building where I lived. The sandwich shop owner next to the barber where I got my haircut was murdered. There was a guy killed, like, I just gotten back from a run, and I actually heard the gunshots right in front of the seminary, on the sidewalk, was killed in a drive-by shooting. And like, part of what I learned, though, was like, when I was out on the streets in East Liberty, when I was out for a run or whatever, no one wanted to give me a hard time.
Right.
Nobody cared, right?
That's right.
It actually got better when I learned to smile at people, and not do that kind of polite white thing where you ignore people. But like, when I learned to kind of walk and wave, like, the whole tenor of those interactions changed. And so for me, that was a thing of like, oh my gosh, like, East Liberty was a perfectly safe place for me to be.
Absolutely.
As a white male.
Yes.
Like, the quote-unquote thugs or whatever, like, no, that there was no interest and no harm. And I remember my third year of seminary making the decision to not go across the river to Giant Eagle anymore, but to go to the Giant Eagle on Shady Avenue, where there's a security guard by the door. And often, I was one of the fewer white people in that store.
Unfortunately, Brian, that's wonderful, and I hear that sentiment a lot from white people who are in predominantly black neighborhoods or enter into spaces where there's predominantly people of color, and unfortunately that's not the case for black people when we enter spaces, right?
It's always there.
It's always there, and it is always there because of the experience we've had over and over and over and over and over again.
Because even if people say, well, look, like, slavery ended over 100 years ago, man. Like, you got to get over it. And even if people point to 1968 and the Civil Rights Act, which I think it is important to note that the end of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act were a big deal, but they were steps. Right? Just because the Civil Rights Act happened.
That's right.
Doesn't mean the reason the Civil Rights Act had to happen was still there.
That's right, Brian. That's right. There's still laws, even from the civil rights era, that were supposed to be implemented that have not been implemented. You know that as well.
Redlining.
I mean,
like, the more I've learned about redlining,
it is,
which is a whole other thing about housing and things like that.
Correct.
But like realizing that redlining was legal, and for those who are listening, redlining was basically a system that was used to assess housing value, and one of the factors was the racial composition of the neighborhood.
That's correct.
That's a really simple.
So very simply, they would draw a red line in between where the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods, now the suburbs, by the way, and that line meant a lot. How banking would hand out loans.
I mean, simply put, you couldn't get an FHA loan.
That's right.
Which is the loan for so many low and middle income people. FHA is the only option to homeownership.
That's right.
And homeownership is the pathway in this country. Like when I learned about redlining, I realized that was legal for years after 1968, and still happens even in subtle ways. I mean,
very much so.
One of my white colleagues said we should do a study on how many black families it takes to get the housing values to drop in a neighborhood. And she was not being terse or racist. She was wondering, is there actually a researchable level where if too many black families move into 100, houses, at what point is the housing, like, these are things that in my mind, I'm like, man, like, never crossed my mind.
Brian, I got to tell you, and unfortunately, I mean, and this is something really recently that you started to look at, not recently, but in your education, right? And
I didn't even know.
And I think it's going to take those kind of steps for us to progress
Yeah.
into what we need to progress into, which is just being anti-racist.
Yeah.
And then maybe next time when we speak again, we can talk about that word racist and kind of dive deep into what that means when you hear it, and then when I hear it, and how we can maybe allow people, and how we can get people to move past how they may feel when they hear those two terms together. So this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it.